Battle of Kursk, the biggest tank battle ever fought. 6,000 tanks. One battlefield, the fate of a war. The German tank commander couldn't believe his eyes. Through the smoke and dust of that scorching July morning in 1943, an entire horizon of Soviet armor was rolling toward him. A steel tsunami that seemed to have no end. He'd been told the Red Army was broken, depleted, finished. Intelligence had promised an easy victory. But as over 800 tanks crashed into each other near the small Russian village of Prokhorovka, creating the largest single tank engagement in human history, he realized with cold dread that everything had changed. This wasn't the Soviet Union of 1941. This was something far more terrifying. Welcome to Kursk, the battle that devoured armies whole and changed the course of World War II forever. The trap. Hitler couldn't resist. By the summer of 1943, Adolf Hitler was a desperate man masquerading as a conqueror. Stalingrad had bled the Wehrmacht white. North Africa was lost. The Allies were preparing to invade Italy. But on the map spread across his table, there was one feature that seemed to promise redemption: a massive bulge in the Soviet lines near the city of Kursk, jutting westward like an invitation. The plan was seductively simple. Codenamed Operation Citadel, it would see German forces attack from both north and south, pinching off the salient and trapping hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops. One decisive blow to restore German prestige and buy time to deal with the mounting threats from the west. Hitler called it a beacon visible around the world. There was just one problem. The Soviets knew everything. Here's where the story takes its first chilling turn. The Battle of Kursk might be the only major engagement in military history where the defender knew not just that an attack was coming, but exactly when and where it would strike. Soviet intelligence, fed by the legendary spy network Lucy in Switzerland and Britain's decoded Enigma intercepts, had provided Stalin with Hitler's complete battle plans. The Red Army had months to prepare, and prepare they did, with a paranoia and thoroughness that would have impressed the pharaohs building pyramids. The fortress that swallowed an army. Imagine constructing defenses so elaborate that they stretched 190 miles deep. Not a single line, but 8 separate defensive belts, each a maze of minefields, anti-tank ditches, trenches, and fortified positions. The Soviets planted over 1 million mines. Yes, 1 million. Creating what German soldiers would later call the Devil's Garden. They dug 3,000 miles of trenches. They positioned thousands of anti-tank guns in carefully camouflaged positions with overlapping fields of fire. But here's the masterstroke that military historians still marvel at. Soviet commander Georgy Zhukov, the man who had saved Moscow and destroyed the 6th Army at Stalingrad, made a decision that seemed insane to many of his subordinates. Instead of launching a preemptive strike while the Germans were still assembling, he chose to let them attack first. Let them exhaust themselves against the prepared defenses, bleed them white. Then and only then would the Red Army launch its counteroffensive. It was psychological warfare on a strategic scale. The Germans would break themselves against Soviet steel before a single offensive operation began. July 5, 1943. 2:20 a.m. The night sky erupts. But here's the twist. The first shells aren't German. Soviet artillery, tipped off about the exact timing of the German attack, opens fire in a massive preemptive bombardment. For the German infantry huddling in their assembly areas, it must have felt like the earth itself had turned against them. The element of surprise, that precious commodity that had carried the Wehrmacht to the gates of Moscow, was gone before the battle even began. When the German offensive finally lurched forward at dawn, it did so with the most powerful concentration of armor ever assembled. The numbers are staggering: 2,700 tanks and assault guns, including the newest and most feared machines in the German arsenal. The Panther tanks rushed into production specifically for this battle. The massive Tiger tanks, each one a mobile fortress mounting the legendary 80 mm gun that could destroy any Soviet tank at ranges exceeding a mile. And the most bizarre weapon of World War II, the Ferdinand tank destroyer, a 65-ton monster with armor 8 inches thick but in a design flaw that would prove fatal. No machine gun for close defense. Against them, 5,000 Soviet tanks, thousands of T-34s, the medium tank that had shocked the Wehrmacht in 1941 with its sloped armor and excellent gun, heavy KV-1s, and new arrivals that made German intelligence officers pale. T-34-85s with improved guns, and experimental heavy tanks that hinted at the monstrous IS-2s to come. The stage was set for mechanical Armageddon, where hell wore tank treads. The Northern Pincer, led by Field Marshal Walter Model, made some initial progress before grinding to a halt against those 8 defensive belts. German tanks found themselves channeled into killing zones where Soviet anti-tank guns waited like patient spiders. The Panthers rushed to the front with mechanical problems still plaguing them, broke down in droves. Those that worked found their complex transmissions couldn't handle the stress. The technological edge Germany had counted on was evaporating in clouds of black smoke and thrown tracks. But it was in the south, at a place whose name would echo through history, where the true horror unfolded. Prokhorovka, July 12, 1943. The German 2 SS Panzer Corps, the elite of the elite, was driving deep. Too deep, the Soviets thought with grim satisfaction. Soviet commander Pavel Rotmistrov threw the 5th Guards tank army directly at them in a headlong charge. 850 Soviet tanks versus 600 German ones, colliding in an area of just a few square miles. What followed defies comprehension. Tank commanders found themselves fighting at ranges measured in yards, not miles. The Soviets deliberately closed to point-blank range, negating the Tiger's advantage in gun range and armor. T-34s rammed German tanks when their shells couldn't penetrate. Tanks climbed over the burning wrecks of other tanks. The air filled with the screams of men burning alive in steel coffins, the crack of ammunition cooking off, the thunder of countless guns firing in a space smaller than a Manhattan neighborhood. A German officer later wrote, "It was impossible to tell who was friend or foe. The smoke was so thick we were navigating by compass. We heard Russian voices on our radio frequencies, laughing, taunting. All around us, tanks were dying. By day's end, the field was a graveyard of burning metal. Soviet losses were catastrophic. They lost more tanks in a single day than the Germans did in the entire battle. But they could afford it. The Soviet industrial base, relocated beyond the Urals and running 24 hours a day, was outproducing German factories by a staggering margin. The Red Army could replace its losses. The Wehrmacht could not. The turning point that never turned back. Here's what makes Kursk's outcome so pivotal. Hitler, receiving news of the Allied landings in Sicily, did something unprecedented. On July 13th, he called off Operation Citadel. Not because the offensive had completely failed. The southern pincer still had some momentum, but because he needed those panzer divisions in Italy. For the first time in the war, Germany had launched a major offensive and simply stopped, withdrew, admitted in effect that the strategic initiative was gone forever. The Soviets didn't stop. On July 12th, the same day as Prokhorovka, they launched Operation Kutuzov against the German forces in the north. On August 3rd, they began Operation Polkovodets-Rumyantsev in the south. The Red Army, that force Hitler had pronounced destroyed in 1941, rolled westward in an offensive that would not stop until it reached Berlin. The numbers tell a story of industrial might overwhelming tactical brilliance. Germany lost 760 tanks and assault guns, 681 aircraft, and suffered over 200,000 casualties. They never recovered the initiative on the Eastern Front. The Soviets lost more, over 800,000 casualties, and perhaps 6,000 tanks. But they had something Germany lacked: reserves. Endless reserves, American Lend-Lease supplies, a population willing to endure unimaginable suffering for victory. And perhaps most crucially, they had broken the psychological hold German armor had exerted since 1939. Soviet tankers no longer feared the panzers. They had met them in the largest tank battle ever fought and driven them from the field. The echo of Kursk stand today at Prokhorovka, where a bell tower memorial rises above the former battlefield. And try to imagine that day in July. The ground itself still yields artifacts, shell fragments, tank parts, occasionally human remains. Local farmers avoid deep plowing. There are still unexploded shells beneath their fields. But Kursk's real legacy isn't found in museums or monuments. It's written in the strategic reality that followed. After Kursk, the Wehrmacht never launched another major offensive on the Eastern Front. From that moment on, it was retreat, defense, and increasingly desperate counterattacks. The tide had turned, not gradually, but in one massive apocalyptic battle that consumed armies whole. The irony is profound. Hitler had sought a beacon visible around the world. He got one, but it illuminated Germany's coming defeat, not its resurrection. 6,000 tanks, one battlefield, one fate decided. The biggest tank battle ever fought was also the beginning of the end, a fact that every tank commander who survived Prokhorovka understood with perfect, terrible clarity as they watched the steppe burn and the Reich's future turn to ash beneath the summer sun. The question was never whether Germany would lose the war after Kursk. The only question was how much more blood the steppe would drink before the end finally came.